Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us here at Oakridge Student Ministries. My name is Jeff, and I'm the Youth and Young Adult Minister here at OPC. This week, we're wrapping up our series on forgiveness called Moving On. Today, we're going to talk about one of the hardest parts about forgiveness, and that's the waiting. It's kind of like going on a really long road trip. You know the destination is worth it, but actually waiting to get there, it can be the worst. And if you're anything like me, you find yourself asking over and over again, are we there yet? And you're either asking yourself or you're bothering your parents with it. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? My 2-year-old has started asking this. I don't know who gave it to her, but are we there yet? I think forgiveness feels the same way. When forgiveness doesn't happen immediately, it can be difficult to be patient through the process. When we talk about this idea of forgiveness, we're talking about letting go of negative feelings we have towards someone who has hurt, harmed, or disappointed us. See, regardless of whether they actually deserve or want our forgiveness, and while that sounds really good, the reality isn't always that easy, because forgiveness takes more than a moment. It often requires us to wait. Things don't always get better right away just because someone apologized. Hurts don't stop hurting just because you've asked for forgiveness. More often than not, forgiveness takes longer than we'd like. Maybe you've been hurt by someone or something in your life, and that person might have even come and apologized. Maybe you accepted that apology and told them that you were ready to forgive and move on. That all sounds great, but any of us who have been in that position before know that it's not always that simple. Because sometimes you forgive and nothing changes. Maybe your feelings don't change, or the other person's behavior doesn't change, or maybe the situation is reversed. You are the one who had to ask for forgiveness, and even though you received that forgiveness, you still feel bad. Things still don't change. The relationship, the circumstances, and the feelings just can't go back to the way they were overnight. That all probably leaves us asking the question, why should we forgive someone, or even forgive ourselves, if things don't change? Does it even matter if it doesn't work the way we want it to? Is forgiveness really worth the wait? The good news is that people have been asking this question about the whole idea of forgiveness for a long time. I think that's because it's a really important thing in our lives. How do I know? Well, because Jesus himself actually talks about this when he was on earth. During that time, Jesus spent a lot of time with his disciples. And while he was with them, Jesus went out of his way to teach his disciples how to live a life that reflected their relationship with him. One day, one of his disciples asked Jesus a question about forgiveness. Let's take a look at that interaction in Matthew chapter 18, verse 21. Then Peter came to him and asked, "Lord, how often should we forgive someone who sins against us? 7 times?" Okay, 7 times seems like a lot of times to forgive someone, right? Well, when Jesus was living, typically people operated on a 3-strike forgiveness policy. You know, the 3 strikes and you're out kind of idea. That meant that they usually only offered forgiveness 3 times. So when Peter said to Jesus that he thought they should forgive 7 times, he was basically going way above and beyond. Peter probably thought 7 times. This is really going to impress Jesus. But knowing Jesus changes everything for us and for the disciples back then. So of course, Jesus responded with an answer that totally changed the way Peter thought about forgiveness. And that's written down in Matthew chapter 18, verse 22. With Jesus replying, "No, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Jesus gave his disciple a number so big that it meant they had to forgive over and over and over again. And the same applies to us. Jesus asks us to forgive others 70 times 7 times. Can you do the math in your head? That's 490 times. That's a ton of forgiveness. But that's how forgiveness is supposed to work. We're supposed to forgive as many times as it takes for it to stick. Because forgiveness takes more than a moment. We have to keep forgiving until the forgiveness actually changes something inside of us. I don't think Jesus was giving a magical number. Instead, I think Jesus was trying to help us understand that forgiveness takes more than a moment. We have to forgive, and then forgive again, and then keep forgiving until our hearts and minds change towards that person who caused us pain. That means forgiving until we can choose not to let our anger towards the other person control us, or until we choose to speak kind words about them when we're around them and when we're not, until we can choose not to get back at them for what they did or said, until we can choose to move on, even if they've never apologized to us. 70 times 7 times. The truth is that forgiveness helps us move on. But that doesn't always happen right away. Sometimes moving on and letting go takes time. And that's what Jesus is trying to encourage us to remember here. Think of it like an injury. Some injuries are minor cuts and scrapes that heal almost the very next day. But some injuries are more serious. They require more time and more energy to heal. Look at this broken arm, for example. See, that injury isn't just going to heal on its own. It's going to take rest, a cast, long-term treatment, and maybe even surgery to fix it. And once the arm is completely healed, it'll never be exactly the same as it was before the injury. There might even be scars or permanent pins and screws left in the arm to make it fully heal. But while the arm might not be exactly the same after it's healed, the person will be able to use the arm again. And the same is true with forgiveness. That healing can take longer when the injury is worse. Just because you forgive someone doesn't mean that you'll be exactly the same after you've healed. The relationship might change, the rules might change, the way you feel might change, but healing is still possible if you practice what Jesus said. If you choose to forgive over and over and over again. See, forgiveness takes time. And through forgiveness, you can experience healing that I promise is worth the wait. So what do we do with this? Since forgiveness takes time, how do we keep going? How can we continue to forgive even when it feels like nothing changes right away? Well, there's a few things I want you to remember about forgiveness as you give this a try in your life. First, forgiveness takes practice. This isn't something that you're just going to be good at automatically. This is something that you need to do over and over and over again. It's just like anything worthwhile. It's an invitation to practice, to choose to move on over and over again. If you want to get really good at soccer, you've got to sit and dribble the ball over and over and over until you get good at it. You've got to practice. You've got to persevere. You've got to push. And then secondly, you need to ask for help. Forgiveness isn't easy. It's not supposed to work right away. It's a healing process, and healing takes time. It doesn't happen the moment you forgive, so don't give up when it doesn't feel like it's working. Pray that God will help you remember the words of Jesus, to forgive over and over and over again. 490 times. Jesus wasn't talking about do this 490 times. You have a little chalkboard in your room that you put a mark down every time you forgive. And until you've made it to 409, no. Practice it. Ask for help when you need help. And third, it's okay if things change. Remember, forgiveness doesn't promise that everything will get fixed right away. And I want you to know today that sometimes part of forgiveness means the relationship changes or it has to end altogether. Things don't go back to the way they were, and sometimes they shouldn't. They should go forward until the new way of thinking or doing things. Fourthly, it's about you. When someone wrongs you, they're not always going to ask for forgiveness. And that definitely means forgiving them can be harder to do. But in those moments, remember that forgiveness isn't just about them. It's about you. Forgiveness will make your life better in the long run. It will help you heal from the hurt you've experienced. Here's something important I want you to know. Forgiveness doesn't mean that those who hurt you shouldn't experience consequences for what they've done to you, especially if they've abused you in any kind of way. If that's you, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you've been hurt in that way. What happened to you is not your fault, and you can take steps towards moving forward And the best way to do that is to tell someone you trust and care about and who cares about you so that they can help. You see, we've spent the last 3 weeks talking about this whole forgiveness thing because it's something we all have to deal with for the rest of our lives. We all find ourselves needing to forgive someone else. And we'll also be in situations where we need to forgive ourselves. The truth is, it's not always going to be easy, which is why it's important to have people we trust who we can talk about it with. So even if it requires a lot of time, I promise you it's worth every second, as it changes you and helps you to move on. So as we finish up this series, I want you to discuss this question. What's one thing you want to remember about forgiveness? Thanks, guys. I look forward to seeing you again next week.